Hello, my name is Shuvaloy Majumdar from Ottawa's Macdonald Laurier Institute in Canada, and welcome to the Facebook Live session here at the Raisina Dialogue 2019. I'm joined by two extraordinary gentlemen covering the entire world when you think about it. One based in Australia, Hugo Seymour with the Perth USAsia Center, and one based in Brazil, Renato Flores with the FGV Brazil. Today we've convened to talk about free trade agreements and the pulse of globalization around the world. We are on the eve of a large trade war between two of the world's largest economies, between the United States and China. It is reshaping how conceptions of trade work around the world, how countries negotiate with one another or collectively. And so we couldn't ask for more finer experts than the two gentlemen that I've been joined with today to discuss the trading architecture of the Indo-Pacific and of the Americas. First, I'd like to turn to my colleague Renato. You've done a lot of work when you look at trade for Brazil and across the Americas. I'm curious, what's your pulse of globalization? How do you feel the future of trade looks from your vantage point?
Well, I think that it will sound funny. Globally, globalization is a very good phenomenon. Of course, there are shortcomings. Of course, there are segments of the population which from time to time are forgotten, but generally globalization is positive, and my country has a positive outlook as regards globalization.
Very good.
We face new trade realities. For instance, this conversation mentions FTAs. It is my personal opinion that FTAs are an old-fashioned instrument, not that I'm against them, but I think that there are new realities in trade, new problems. There's going to be inevitably a revision of the WTO. So FTAs, as we consider them in the past, and by the past I mean until last year, are an old-fashioned instrument.
Do you think it was wise for China to be admitted into the World Trade Organization?
Of course, they gained a lot. And as you were asking me the outlook from Brazil,
yes.
China nowadays is our most important trade partner.
Fascinating.
We would like to have other partners in Asia. I was kidding with my colleague from Australia, would like to go to Southeast Asia, yes, where Australia has a very strong penetration. Of course, we have a lot of business with the European Union and with the US. So there are new realities, and I think we should be creative and adapt to these new realities.
Thank you for that. And what a great segue to talk about trade and competition in the Indo-Pacific theater. As you know, there have been many conversations, whether it's a Trans-Pacific Partnership as perhaps a means to constrain how China operates in the region. Australia has big interests across the entire Indo-Pacific region. There are alternative trading bodies, including the RCEP, which you've done a lot of work on. In fact, you've published a paper for the Raisina debates on this, which we're all grateful for. What's your perspective on RCEP? Is that a panacea? Is it an antidote, an alternative to the Trans-Pacific Partnership? What's your take from Australia?
Thanks, Shuv, and thanks, Renato, and thanks, Observer Research Foundation, for having us all here.
Yes.
At Raisina Dialogue, we're very privileged. So, with respect to the last few years in the Asia-Pacific, now Indo-Pacific, which encapsulates the rise of India, which I think is an elegant way of looking at the world, especially from Australia's vantage point, with ASEAN to our north, at the heart of that region. Over the last 3 or 4 or 5 years, there's been 2 proposed mega regional trade agreements, RCEP and the TPP.
Correct.
Obviously, the TPP was a more ambitious trade reform agreement with more advanced reform measures in areas of environmental regulation and labour standards, and RCEP, more traditional tariff reduction agreement. Obviously, TPP has its troubles and its revivals with the withdrawal of the US. RCEP has also had its troubles in the sense that deadlines have come and gone with respect to when RCEP was wanted to be concluded, which makes some sort of sense. RCEP encapsulates all of the ASEAN countries with very different development levels, and also China, Japan, Korea in North Asia, Australia, New Zealand, and most importantly, which is what is reflected in our paper, India.
Correct.
So I think in this world of disruption and instability, whilst very easy to talk down trade, and that's been happening politically, I think there are some very significant achievements that are over the horizon, such as a revival of the TPP and also hopefully a concluded RCEP soon, which will enable trade-oriented countries like Australia, like India, to further diversify their economies,
Right.
to further engage with markets.
Right. You know, that's a wide spate of countries that you just articulated for the Indo-Pacific region. Do you think that Japan, India, Australia, and China can come to an agreement on trading rules for this region?
I think it's very challenging times.
Sure it is. Yeah.
Ideally, with the TPP,
Yes.
that was a very strategic agreement in the sense that it sort of laid the rules of the road for how trade and investment can operate in this part of the world.
Right.
Ideally, you would have a situation where Indonesia, Korea, even maybe one day China will be part of that agreement, playing by the same rules. Very challenging in this time to see consensus.
Renato is not in full
Yeah.
agreement with you.
Just to provoke for our next conversation.
Yes, sir.
Actually, the TPP was a very clever firewall to insulate China from the West and as much of Asia as possible in terms of norms, rules, and standards.
Right.
So I think that the ideal solution would be what you mentioned, and Hugo said that, well, that's not impossible, not that that is going to be feasible
Right.
in the next 5 years, would be an agreement within Asia,
Right.
involving India, Australia, Japan, and China also.
Well, let's talk about this in the context briefly of globalization. Both in Brazil and in Washington, you see very different types of political leadership emerging, emphasizing a different idea of economic national interest and ways to exercise it. We have yet to see the story in Brazil play out. It's early days with your new government, but in Washington we've seen that the administration is not shy to use tariff walls to try and accomplish its own objectives. My own country, Canada, was involved in a large trading negotiation with respect to the North American continent. Meanwhile, in China, we've seen a pattern of trade that some have alleged can be classified as weaponized commerce. What's your take on how these actors in these capitals, in Brazil, in Washington, in China, mean for the idea of globalization itself?
Well, I think there is a very important point. I don't know whether people read Mr. Trump's book on the art of negotiation. And the
Yes.
key rule in his book is that before sitting in the negotiation table with your other partner, you punch him in the nose. So I think that many times people overvalue Mr. Trump's menaces. This was the case with the trade war with China. So he moves two steps, then he comes back one step. I don't think there will be a trade war. There will be a lot of attrition, but I think that things are going to be solved in a rather harmonious way, as the Chinese like to say. And in terms of my country, at least what the new president announces is a greater alignment with the US.
Right.
So probably in terms of trade, we are going to be closer partners than we are now.
Perhaps an open canvas. And in Australia, you've got a free trade agreement with China. How's that working out?
We've had, in the last 3 to 4 years or 5 years, completed free trade agreements with China, Japan, and Republic of Korea. So North Asia, we've got the full suite of three.
Right.
And for Australian exporters who are taking advantage of these agreements, it's been terrific. I think there's also an element that these trade agreements also have a great strategic value, that
Right.
they are a mark on the wall that Australia and China, Australia and Korea,
Yeah.
Australia and Japan
Right.
are partners in commerce and on a strategic level. I think that's very important. And Australia should also be trying to do the same thing, and is trying to do the same thing with Indonesia and India and other partners in the region as well.
Well put. So Hugo, Renato, from New Delhi, my name is Shuvaloy Majumdar with the Raisina Dialogue 2019 Facebook Live. Thank you for joining us. The debate continues. Good night.